Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University.
Welcome to the Politics Guys, the podcast taking you deeper into this week's politics, one story at a time. I'm Trey Orndorff, and it's wonderful to be back on the show this week. I'm joined, as always, by the interesting Jay Carson, who I might add got a huge social media response for last week's show. So, Jay, we're going to have to see if we can match the controversy of last week. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Well, I had no intention to generate controversy, but we take it as it comes. So,
well, it's always interesting the things that will and will not get the big responses back. I've said things sometimes, and I think I'm surprised that nobody had a bigger pushback on that. And then other times you think, that's the thing. But anyway, we'll have to see if we'll hit any of those buttons. So, Jay, I thought we might lead off this week talking a little bit about Trump and his changes to the payments in Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, cost-sharing reductions. Basically, these were subsidies that were going to kind of make healthcare under the Affordable Health Care Act cheaper for lower-income people. And Trump has basically called this a bailout of insurance companies, and he thinks it's unlawful. As a matter of fact, he sees this as being Democrats because there's not actually a legislative component to this, as just being a massive subsidy. What do you think about this, and what do you think is going to move forward?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, it doesn't so much matter what I think about it. I think the courts so far that have looked at this have agreed that it is, in all likelihood, unconstitutional, but have stayed enforcing that order pending, the idea that Congress is going to get something worked out. Now that Congress hasn't, Trump is taking that step, which again, if you believe that it's unconstitutional, then that's the appropriate thing to do. But there's something else he's doing too that I think we should talk about, and that is changing rules as far as what plans insurers can sell, and allowing short-term insurance plans, which had been prohibited under rule by Obamacare.
Now, do you think that one of the things that I've been reading and looking at this is I had wondered, oftentimes when we get on the show and we talk about some moves by Trump, they seem to be a little out of left field. They seem to be a little bit gut response, but in some ways, this might actually be a positive for Republicans in the legislature, because if Democrats want to make a legislative fix to this, Republicans now have a bargaining chip.
Well, and not only that, I think what's interesting, this demonstrates sort of the upside and downside of governing by executive order. So much of what was in the Affordable Care Act was left to the discretion of the Department of Health and Human Services. And this was a big complaint about it at the time, was that it was extremely vague as to what was actually going to happen, and assigned all this rulemaking authority to the department, essentially the president, the administration, to write in all the details as far as what insurers can and can't do. In order to get this passed, through the Democratic Congress, President Obama and the Congress drafted it that way. And now it's sort of you live by the pen, you die by the pen. So the Trump administration is now rolling back and rewriting those changes. Now, that was something that was sort of already going to be in the works. I think if a broader health reform deal had been possible, the Republicans would rather have put this stuff into statute as opposed to leaving it in rule where it can be changed by the next administration. But it's sort of you have the choices that you have. It's sort of
Right.
Plan A failed, so this is Plan B, and to the extent it wasn't already going to be happening, but some of this stuff would I think rightfully go into administrative rulemaking. Other, I think, is closer to bigger policymaking that should be done by Congress. And that's not to say that there's a lack of authority or something like that for HHS to do this. I just think it be better done by Congress. But go ahead.
No, and that's an interesting point. It's one of the things that I often talk to students about when you talk about the relationship between Congress and the legislative branch, is that the modern presidency is far more powerful not just because the modern presidency, as time has gone on, has slowly accumulated executive precedent, but also because Congress has ceded a lot of the things that you would imagine to be legislative to the president. And the upside, and there's always these short-term upsides for Congress, which is then they don't have to be the bad guy. They're not the ones
Right.
changing or creating the rule. But the flip side of that is when it's housed entirely, as you noted it, with the stroke of the pen. Well, it just takes a stroke of a pen to undo it. So it's far more potentially temporary, depending on how your elections play out.
Yeah, and also I would say it's much less transparent.
Oh, for
Um,
sure.
again, there's an administrative processes that are Administrative Procedure Act where you change rules and you have a what's called a comment period and so forth. Um, but it's not the same as a legislative debate on this, and the criticism of this is it's fairly undemocratic. There's completely understandable reasons why you assign things to administrative agencies as we live in a more complex world. Um, but you live by the pen, you die by the pen. The big thing that I think that Trump is doing here, though, if you look back to what Obamacare promised, the reasons that it was supposed to be implemented, there were a couple, and one had to do with the fear that someone who is uninsured has something catastrophic befall them. They get some terrible disease, they get run over by a bus, something like that, that is a tremendous expense, and they are bankrupted by it.
Hmm.
And we were inundated, when the Democrats were seeking to pass Obamacare with this, stories about how, the biggest driver of bankruptcy are these medical claims. Um, and the idea behind all this being people could reasonably be responsible for their own health care for your, colds and flu and sprained ankles and those types of medical needs. Um, and that those people who were in dire need, the ones who were, the poor, the chronic conditions and so forth, typically would qualify for Medicaid, Medicare, or have some other subsidy, or be have access to like a high risk pool or something like that. So that was the rationale behind Obamacare. The other piece of it was hospitals um, were very much the party that was hit most with the burdens of some of this other care of uninsured care. It
The
typically fell to
charity cases.
hospitals.
Yep.
Yeah, people show up in the emergency room and you have to treat them. And again, this is, Democrats typically have made the argument. It's almost not fair with Mike not on here. He can yell at me next week. No, but people go untreated, people die, yada yada yada. When
Yeah,
in
I
fact, I
think
mean
he would
that
take
that
you
hadn't been
to task
happening.
on that phrase right there. I'm just.
Yeah, that hadn't been happening in the past. What happens is people were treated. It's just a matter of where you assign that the cost for that, and it had been falling on hospitals to a large part, and they were not unsurprisingly, and you can't blame them. Um, Interested in moving people to shifting that cost to someone else, be it private insurers or the government.
Well, and to be fair with that argument, I mean the other part of it is there is geographic and unequal distribution of that on hospitals as well, right? Your location in large part
Right.
can determine your ability to then service how many you're having. So, for instance, here in my area, in the Daytona Beach area, that's a much more massive number than other places.
What Obama. So this is sort of a long way of getting to what the new rules will do. Will sort of put back in place remedies that would have addressed those issues, and that is a return to allowing people to buy a sort of bare bones coverage for catastrophic uh, injuries, um, and also allowing folks who are between jobs to buy part time um, or short term insurance plans, which used to be under the rules. Well, prior to Obamacare rules, you could buy them for a year. The idea is you're between jobs, Cobra coverage is too expensive. You don't really need full coverage. Again, if you're reasonably healthy, and your concern is what happens if something catastrophic happens. They're affordable and can keep you tide you over till you get that next job or qualify for some other insurance. And Obamacare had gotten rid of those. One reason was, I think, to drive people into the exchanges, because that would be a good option other than an exchange.
Well, then you want to
Um,
increase your pool, right?
yeah, exactly. So those are, to me, I think, are some really pretty big changes, and it's going to allow people to have more choice in what they want to do with their insurance. And I mean, I don't know where you are on this. I mean, my sense is we're probably more or less on the same page
Yeah, well, I mean,
on
I think
this.
we're on a similar page. We're not going to have probably a giant argument. I mean, the one thing that I think is a little bit the potentially problematic thing here that maybe we might disagree about a little bit is going to be I'm always a little bit leery. You know, we were talking about the stroke of the pen. I'm leery of presidents attempting to kind of force congressional change. So in this case, you know, it's one thing to say, hey, Congress needs to get something done. It's another to make changes that you think might very well kind of implode what's currently happening. So I mean, if that's the intent here, I have some trouble with that. Um, you know, in other words, try to create a situation in which you have to
Sure,
repeal.
trying to drive a crisis
Yeah,
when if there isn't one. Now again, most conservatives would argue, and me among them, that there already is a crisis, in that so many of these counties, you're down to one company that is on the exchange. Um, the prices have increased dramatically for those people in the exchanges. And if the whole idea was we're going to get you into this new insurance market, you're going to have more choices. Uh, it hasn't worked, and what it's done, and I think the numbers bear this out. The biggest expansion has not been in these folks buying private insurance through an exchange, but rather expansion of Medicaid. Um,
yeah. And as we kind of continue this conversation about what kind of Trump and the Democrats and some and moves moving forward, I think we need to probably move to our first sponsor, Brooklinen.
yes,
I don't know about you, Jay. You have Brooklinen sheets, don't you?
I do, and I love them. Trey. This is you're a little bit younger than I am. There is something about, you get to a certain age, and you feel sort of like more of a grown up when you start getting grown up products, like caring about your sheets. As Mike points out, you spend a whole lot of your time of your life in bed, and maybe you don't think about it, but you do, and that you want to have quality time. So Brooklinen is a fantastic way to do that. It gives you a luxury product at what is really an affordable price. So um, I am all for it. I love Brooklyn sheets. Can't recommend them enough.
Well, good. And I think that you need to try these sheets so that you'll know that you're going to love them too. And at brooklinen.com, you got an exclusive offer just for Politics Guys listeners. You're going to get $20 off and free shipping when you use the promo code TPG at brooklinen.com. In fact, Brooklinen is so confident that you'll love their new sheets that they offer a risk-free 60-night satisfaction guarantee and a lifetime warranty on all their sheets and comforters. So there is no reason not to give these sheets a try. The
And,
only
and I
way
would also point out you have a whole range of colors, patterns that you're gonna love, and it's luxury bedding, underpriced, and you got to try them.
Well, and the only way to get those and to get the $20 off and the free shipping is to use the promo code TPG at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com, promo code TPG. Brooklinen. These are the best sheets ever, and you know it because Jay just told you. um, so now that we're sleeping better, which is actually, I mean, you know, we tease about that, but it is important. I mean, I'm a
Yeah.
guy I run half marathons and I'm training for a try. So trust me, you want to sleep well. Um, but you know, we've been talking about Obama and kind of the moves with the subsidies and the Affordable Health Care Act. But there was kind of another big Democrat Trump moment, and that was this week Trump sending a letter indicating to Congress what are the things that he's going to want in order to kind of finalize a deal uh, making permanent the Dreamers move that he has put on life support at this juncture. Uh,
Mhm.
and this has been interesting. It's been a really interesting story. Trump has kind of, he bypassed a few weeks ago Republicans and started working with Democrats, which ruffled a lot of people's feathers. Shocking. And now he is kind of setting in stone. Here are the things that I'm going to have if we're going to move forward on a Dreamers deal. And the big central one was he's coming back to it again. I mean, it was a campaign promise, was the wall,
He
right?
wants a
He
wall.
wants a wall. And it is this okay, again, just so listeners understand, I am against the wall. However, however, it is fascinating to me how often people will listen to presidential candidates and congressional candidates who are running, and they are saying the same thing on their prompt, three or four things like, this is what I'm going to do, and everybody goes, they don't really mean that. And then you get into office, everybody's shocked. They're like, he's still pushing for the wall. I'm thinking, of course he's pushing for the wall. That was his his central campaign theme. I think what's surprising is that people find it surprising that he continues to bring this up. But
Yeah.
nevertheless,
No, I think
here it
that's
is.
yeah. Well, he has made some comments after there was the sit down with Chuck and Nancy, as he calls them, about, well, we're going to get the wall eventually, and there was maybe this idea that, okay, we'll move forward with something on Dreamers, but eventually I'm going to get my wall. Um, my sense of this is that, well, first thing, going back to a month or so ago, where he had the sit down and announced that he would work with Democrats. I don't know how much he was actually working with them, as opposed to, it was just a sit down and a photo op. And he sort of said, I'm not against keeping the Dreamers here. Um, but then he sort of realized he had sort of given away all his ground, and I think this is Trump in Trump negotiating mode. You ask for everything and see what they come back with, and get the best deal you can, which is again one of those reasons I think a lot of people, even if they didn't expect the wall, or were realistic about his ability to fulfill that campaign promise. I think there was still a sense of a lot of people voted for Trump in the idea that he was going to be a tougher and better negotiator with the
Hmm.
Democrats. And so far that hasn't panned out, but it remains to be seen. Um, my concern
Well, I
is,
mean,
oh, go ahead.
I, I think that in some ways, though, I mean, he is a tougher, if you will, negotiator, but the idea that you can always, like, I think there might be a disconnect in what people want and what's the most effective. So
Sure.
being a tougher negotiator, I actually would argue he probably is, but I think that's probably a less effective presidential strategy.
Well, my sense though is it doesn't matter if you're going to be a really tough negotiator if you're not going to get anything done at the end of the day. Um, Politics is there's I mean, business is like this too, I suppose, but there's a timing to things, and there are windows that open and close. And in business, you can sort of walk away from a deal, and then maybe come back 6 months, 8 months later, and the deal is still there, or the other party is still willing to negotiate. Politics, because it's so fluid, isn't always like that. The Democrats you're dealing with now may not be the Democrats you're dealing with next year. And I don't mean in terms of change of personnel. I mean in terms of they're
Policy.
going to have their eyes towards their election rather than getting something done. And there's sort of a window where um, Democrats are better having the issue than they are having the solution. And I should say that would apply to both parties. Um,
Well, you saw
so
that. I mean, you
that's
saw
my
that at the end of
concern.
President Obama's term, right? You have
Sure.
Republicans who, in many, they had how many repeal votes, and no one honestly thought those were going through, but it gave them beautiful leverage for coming back to their districts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, you can go back to the Obama administration in um, 2000, well, 2000, well, no, just before, I'm sorry, back up before President Obama was president, there were most likely enough votes to fix the Dreamer problem. But it was sort of scuttled by none other than Senator Obama, who were Democrats. Hey, let's stick tough, and we're not going to give in piecemeal on winning this issue. Rather, we want immigration as a whole as an issue.
I had forgotten
So I
about that.
think
That's right.
Trump runs that. Yeah, Trump runs a risk of now again, that's not to say it all would have worked out, because George W. Bush was okay with it, but he was getting a lot of heat from the right. But regardless, I think there is often a time when um, one party will change, will trade the issue for actual a solution, and the closer you get to an election, the more and more that takes hold. So I guess that's my concern is, if Trump wants to deal with the Democrats, great, but they may not want to have a deal with him. And I pointed this out with Mike and I had the show, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, that's why you have to go to your own party first and find out what votes you have to do what before you try to deal with the other side.
Well, and it's true. And you make a really interesting point about the differences between business bargaining and political bargaining, in that you've got very different bases, and you have different timelines. And it's something I think maybe that Mike and I, maybe as political scientists, might take a little bit for granted. That's the model that we kind of always have running around in our heads, because that's the world we kind of exist in. But you're right. There's going to be a very different kind of business world model where things can. I had not thought about it that way before, Jay. That's very
Yeah,
fascinating.
I mean, again, this is something that in my regular life I do pretty frequently, and you come together with somebody. Hey, here's a deal. Can we do this? Can we can't do this? And it falls apart, and you say, okay. People walk away, um, and there's no. I don't want to say there's no hard feelings, because sometimes there are, but it's not as if there's always the incentive not to have a deal, which I think is something that's present in politics, that you don't see in the rest of the world. And Democrats are under incredible pressure. Keep in mind, I mean, because they have gone with the Trump is the devil sort of narrative. Um, it makes it that much more difficult for anyone to try to make a deal. And you even saw that after the initial sit down. There were folks on the left who were protesting, not to give in. What they want is sort of a full amnesty for everybody, open borders, yada yada yada. But um,
Which, by the way, I'm on that. I'm on board with that. But continue.
no, but I mean, the Nancy Pelosi, I mean, got an earful back in her own district for sitting down with Trump.
Right.
So, I guess my sense is, if there's something that could be done, that'd be great, because it does seem to be that the Dreamers are an area that enjoy broad public support, and broad support even within the Republican Party. I think most Republicans, the last poll numbers I saw, it was somewhere in the range of 65-75%. Would say there ought to be some sort of exception, road to citizenship, whatever you want to call it, for them. And Democrats, it's even higher. But I don't know whether he'll be able to get that done. You can't fault him for asking for more stuff.
No.
But I would be concerned if he just kills the deal and nothing happens.
Well, I mean, ultimately, at some point here, Republicans, Trump in general, they've got to pass some kind of legislation, or they are going to have the worst midterm shellacking that has happened in the history of mankind, because you're going to have the president, you're going to have Congress, and you're going to have, zero bill. And I don't mean zero in the sense that nothing is passing Congress at all, but none of the high profile things, if none of them can get done, that's a difficult sell. That
Yeah,
is a
yeah,
very difficult sell.
yeah.
And I know both of us have worked on campaigns, and so we know how hard of a sell that is. Um, well, why don't we move forward, Jay? And because there was another huge story this week, and we're going to need to probably spend some time on this one, and that one is Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
So it feels like there's this recurring theme when you talk about politics that we have to talk about sex too. So just a heads up for our listeners, we're not going to try to get um, creepy or anything above PG here, but we are going to be talking about, a guy who has done some creepy things. And there's a reason for it. So we finally have this big New York Times and New Yorker stories, I should say, that come out about Weinstein. He's a big guy in Hollywood. Maybe, I don't know, for some of our listeners, maybe a Hollywood type. And if I say Hollywood, do you know what I'm talking about, Jay?
I have no idea what you're talking about
Oh
now.
my goodness. Oh, okay. So you're gonna have to watch BoJack Horseman, and then you'll understand Hollywood and the critique of Hollywood. So, listeners, if you haven't already, you should. It's a depressive show that you should not watch with any of your children, and take it from a guy with 3 kids. But put your headphones in and go watch BoJack Horseman on Netflix. Anyway, back to Weinstein. He has been forever and a day harassing women, specifically involving getting into bathrobes, getting people to come to his hotel room for meetings, and there he is in a bathrobe and making creepy requests for massage and baths. And so, I mean, that's okay. What does that have to do with politics? Well, here's why. The New York Times called it, quote, the worst kept secret, unquote, because there was no journalistic outfit really willing to nail the details and hit publish. And they also noted
And
as
that
to
and
the
that I the big point to me is that includes the New York Times,
well,
who
and
had
the
a
big
a
and the
story
biggest
prepared
one.
about this years ago, and yeah,
Well, the biggest one was NBC. So
yeah.
because NBC, the channel that nailed Bill O'Reilly, they have for the last nearly 2 years had a guy named Ronan Farrow was doing in-depth reporting on this, and they continually shut the story down. So Farrow actually says, "Well, screw you, NBC," and he walks over to the New Yorker and says, "I've
The New
got this,"
Yorker.
and they say, "Yeah, let's publish this." And so here's why we're going to talk about on the politics, guys. I don't always talk about GQ, but I think Drew Magary from the GQ actually summed it up perfectly. He says that, look, Hillary Clinton was shocked and appalled. President Obama was disgusted. But everybody in the DNC was taking money from and is not calling out until they absolutely had to, Harvey. Why? Because he was a huge, huge backer for lots and lots of Democrats. And he says, look, they're giving it back now, but Democrats are never going to move forward in a meaningful way as long as they're taking it. Now, he's taking a shot just at Dems, but I think we want to talk about this in a broader sense. You know, money, political money, where it comes from, and well, Jay, what do you think about all that?
Well, yeah, I think the story is fascinating for a lot of reasons, and yes, there was a lot of on the right sort of Schadenfreude that we're sort of celebrating that this has been called out. And the other thing is, Trey, I mean, it's, as you said, worst kept secret. The papers have pointed there were various jokes about this on shows from 30 Rock to jokes at the Oscars to. I mean,
Yeah.
it's sort of everybody, everybody knew, but nobody knew, and that's troubling. And to me, it's not even so much um, the idea of well, do you know, and what duty do you have then to report the wrongdoings of someone else if it hasn't happened to you? It's just something you heard about. Um, but it's the hypocrisy of Hollywood, and this is something that drives folks on the right batty. Um, and that they're always willing to lecture the rest of the country on what's good and right and proper and so forth, but yet are also not willing to stand up to Weinstein. Now, I think the response I hear from the left is, "What about Trump? What about Trump?" Um, and I think, yeah, exactly. I mean, Trump's been accused of doing similar things. Not, I don't want to say that there's a um, it's just like we count up how many claims are made against him and so forth, but not on the level of Weinstein. And I think we should also point out that some of these allegations against Weinstein, and they still are just allegations at this point, are not just creepy, but are criminal, are rape, are gross sexual imposition, or
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. It's not just again being a cad, being a creep. Um, So, and I think Jonah Goldberg had a great piece, National Review, earlier this week, saying, "Listen, it's time to if you're only outraged when it's somebody on the other side that this happens to, then you kind of need to reexamine your moral compass."
An excellent point.
Many conservatives were rightfully outraged at the Trump stuff. Um, Believe me, many Republicans, conservatives, would rather have had anyone else in the world as their nominee, but didn't have that option. Um, so I think that is the I don't know. I guess that's my hope, is that this is something everyone can agree is outrageous and should be condemned regardless of where it comes from. The other piece that made this a political story was last week, before he was forced out of the Weinstein Company. Harvey Weinstein essentially mounted his defense
When he brought
against these
up the
charges.
NRA and Trump and
Yeah,
yep.
and it was sort of the
I'm not nearly as
um,
bad as those guys.
right, or it was the, like, okay, let's assume I did this stuff. Hey, I'm still against the NRA. And I'm still one of you. I'm still on your side. And I mean, to some extent, I think that still carries some currency in a lot of circles. His defense was almost, look how much I gave to Democrats. You
Yeah.
can't convict me. Look how much I gave. You know, I mean, his money paid for those pink hats. I don't know if that's exactly
Well,
correct. I
I
don't think he
mean,
paid for the pink hats, but understand that's the direction that the money was flowing. I mean, he gave over. Um, I'm looking at Business Insider reports, $1.5 million to Hillary Clinton throughout her career, 300,000 to the DNC. Those are just, you know, again, a couple quick numbers off the top of my head. Not even looking at President Obama, not even look at bundling for super PACs.
right,
Um,
which can be hard to
you
do.
know, so
Well, and I'll say that th- in general, I am a libertarian who had lean support to the right on many of my issues. But this is why, over a year ago, I was just so furious with Republicans who were willing to go along with Trump. And you kind of pointed that out, right? I mean, because guys, I mean, who cares if he can win or has the money? But when you lose that kind of that legitimacy, I don't know where you go from there. And I just, I recognize this makes me probably impossible to be elected, and that's why I'm talking on a politics guy's podcast with a PhD instead of, running for office somewhere. But I just can't get behind the idea that you have to deal with some of this just morally corruptness to move forward. And I'm just, even on the side that I have worked my life for, you know, and I just, it's
you no
horrible.
you are, and I've worked in politics for quite a while, and it attracts some unsavory characters,
And it's,
and
mm-hmm,
sometimes it is difficult to realize, look, if you want to be part of the process, you unfortunately have to interact with those unsavory characters, and I guess the extent to which you interact with them is up to you. I mean, again, some people do it better than others, and I think there were probably some people who would. There may have been many Democrats who have said, "Hey, Harvey wants to throw you a fundraiser," and they said, "No, thanks."
mm-hmm.
Um, and I know there are Republicans who do that sort of thing of, look, I'm not going to take money from this person, this group. I don't want to be associated with that. And I guess again, the funny thing is, even with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, it's not even that they associated and took money. It was they actively praised him.
Right.
And again, Michelle
That's the
Obama.
problem. Yeah.
They had him at the White House, and he's not, again, well, this is a guy who just happened to give to our campaign. He was
Well, and you could
he's a
respect
great
that
man.
more. You remember back when there was Pimpin' for Paul and the Bunny Ranch, I think it was in Nevada, was sending money to Ron Paul, and people said, "Well, you got to give it back," and he basically said, "Look, I'm not supporting that, but I'm not going to send their money back. I
Yeah.
can accept that, right? If you can just say, look, I get it. That's where it came from. I'm going to use it. But you're right, that it's that level of praise when you make that next step. But as we talk more about that, we should probably first talk about Bombfell, which is an easier way for men to get better clothes. I don't know about you, Jay. I'm an unusual kind of guy. I like clothes shop. There's a way I want to look when I venture out, but it's problematic. It's difficult. It takes time. And if you came with shoe shopping with me, you would get tired long before I ever bought any shoes, if I bought any at all, because that's how picky I am. So Bombfell does it differently. What you do is you're going to complete a simple questionnaire, and then you're matched to a personal stylist one-on-one who will email you their selections, after which you'll have 48 hours to look them over, make changes, cancel altogether. It's completely your call. Then, when you get your clothes, you have 7 days to tell Bombfell what you want to keep, and you just send back the rest. It's completely flexible. You get clothes when you want, pause or cancel at any time. Bombfell never charges above retail price, and they offer free shippings and returns. If you're skeptical, and I get it, I was too. I'm the guy who likes to pick out my own clothes, but the clothes my Bombfell stylist picked out looked and fit perfectly. I kept everything, and it has definitely upgraded my wardrobe, even a man who is picky as I am. So it was by far the easiest and most convenient clothes shopping experience I've ever had. But best of all, Bombfell's giving Politics Guys listeners a special offer. $25 off your first purchase. To take advantage of this, go to bombfell.com/TPG. That's BOMBFELL.com/TPG. Bombfell. Open and close. So, do we want to talk more about Weinstein, or is it time to shift gears, Jay?
Well, it's up to you. If you can, again, I think the Weinstein thing is fascinating for a lot of reasons, and we could do a whole show just on that. But
Well,
I know
especially since
there's other stuff going on.
it's true. It's true. I mean, I guess one of the other big items that I think, as a matter of fact, Michael, before he went on vacation, he was publishing this on our account about the big move about the Boy Scouts. Enough so that I think all of us were kind of interested in taking it on. So for the listeners who might not know, the Boy Scouts of America announced on Wednesday to accept girls, marking a historic shift in the century-old organization, and it has set off a huge debate. Um, and the debate, there's a lot of different questions about it. Fascinatingly enough, one of the first things that I noted was that apparently the Girl Scouts were really upset about this. I mean, I guess
I'd imagine.
they have new
Yeah,
competition, right?
yeah,
But they said that they felt a little blindsided, and they argued that one of the positives to having a Girl Scout organization, of course, is this opportunity to have kind of a different kind of safe space with members of your own sex. Um, the Boy Scouts, on the other hand, basically said that they think that they could nurture better kinds of relationships in a co-ed environment. And bonus, they think it's a more streamlined process, right? So if you got boys and
yeah,
girls, you can just drop them off at the same place. They're going to be doing the same things together as opposed to being segregated. What do you think about all this, Jay?
yeah. Well, I think probably a lot of listeners would expect me to take the reaction a lot of people did of, oh my gosh, it's political correctness run amok. What's the world coming to? You can't even have Boy Scouts anymore. But actually, I'm going to take the contrary position, and I think there's a really good conservative argument to be made for what the Boy Scouts did, and that is that, look, the important word in Boy Scouts isn't boy, it's scouts, and that's what they're looking for. And the Boy Scouts have traditionally been I'll call it like a small c conservative organization. I don't mean that in a political sense of
Mm-hmm.
anything, but it's sort of, it is what it is, and it has a sense and a purpose of preserving traditions, preserving heritage, of harkening back of, these are the skills that our pioneer forefathers learned and helped them survive, and it's cool to keep that going. And there is and also a sense in the Boy Scouts, and I should say I wasn't a Boy Scout. My sister was a Girl Scout, and my three daughters have been through Girl Scout programs.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, I bought a lot of cookies, but there was a sense that Boy Scouting is to foster leadership. It's a different. Again, it harkens back to the sort of a 19th century ethos, I think, and in that sense, it's conservative. Um, Girl Scouts, there is, I mean, at the upper echelons of that, a political thing going on, and I don't think it hits down to the troop level, but their national board has been, um, again, and I don't want to say liberal, but again, not that conservative. Um, and I can find some articles we can post on that. But so I look at this and saying, if the Boy Scouts are, what they want to do is to preserve and spread those values, I think this is a great way to do it, because what it's saying is those values are universal. Doesn't matter what your sex or gender is. These are values that are important for Americans. So I think that's great. And look, it allows girls who might be more into activities that are more uh, outdoorsy, more wilderness, more survival, more, than say that, typical Girl Scout things. And again, I don't want to, get boxed in because, my kids have gone on plenty of Girl Scout camping trips and so forth. But uh, I think it's a great alternative. And as you point out, there's also a practical reality to it.
Right, there's a business model
On
here. I mean, the Boy Scouts have had
Yeah,
declining membership, and so I mean, this is a business move, right? So if you start being too niche of a product, you got to find a way to market it to a wider demographic to make up your revenues.
yeah. And I think the other thing that's interesting and important is the Boy Scout board voted on this. It was unanimous. And that says something. And their interest, they want to expand this to, as you said, attracting families into scouting. And so I all in all, I think it's a good thing. Now the Girl Scouts, I can see it's going to be as you mentioned, more competition.
Yeah.
Um,
As a matter of fact, my wife, she worked for the Boy Scouts for a while back when we were undergraduates, and it was always interesting to kind of see the different models because there's some other competing organizations. It's fascinating. I had wondered what your position was going to be, Jay, and again, I think that a private organization should be able to do whatever it wants to do, right? So if the Boy
Amen.
Scouts want to do boys and girls, if the girls, that's the whole beauty of having private organizations. And if you think that's a failure, so for instance, there have long been some competing organizations with the Girl Scouts, and so if you don't like that, you can form your own, and that's a wonderful thing. I mean, that's what that's what we as libertarians and conservatives for the most part we're going to agree on, But it is fascinating as demographic wise to think. There is, I think, some value to having space for kids where, especially when you are in those particularly hormonal ages, to have the the well, I think maybe the Girl Scouts said it, kind of a safe space in that sense where you can kind of be a boy, be a girl. But I recognize that's not perfect, and again, I'm not trying to tell the Boy Scouts what to do, but it is fascinating how as we've moved into the contemporary era, the idea, it almost seems like it's considered a moral bad if you say, hey, look, this is going to be for men, this is going to be for women, this is going to be for girls, this is going to be for boys, this is going to be for African Americans. Like when you make those kinds of
Right. When you make any kind of those distinctions.
yeah,
But I think it's worth pointing out that the Boy Scouts program, what they're talking about, would still preserve that on a lot of different levels.
yes,
This starting at the Cub Scout level, there would be sort of girls troops and boys troops, and they would do joint activities and so forth. But it's not a thing of you're just the high school boys and girls camping together in the same tent kind of thing.
right, right,
I mean,
yes,
there's,
yes,
there's that. I think we should point out that's not at all what they're talking
and
about.
that's
They're
a
talking
very
about
good
opening up
point.
the and that there have been since the 70s Boy Scout affiliated programs that included girls. So it's not a complete jump, but no, I'm all for that. I think there's a benefit to having that same sex uh, sort of. I don't know what you want to call it, but
Because no matter
But
what we
yeah,
call it, we're going to get in trouble. This is where the
exactly. I
controversy is
almost like
going to
stumbled into
occur.
something I didn't want to
Yeah.
say, but no, look, I think there's something to that, allowing those spaces for boys to be boys and girls to be girls. Um, but I think what the Boy Scouts are proposing would preserve that.
hmm
Um, and still allow the the idea of the joint enjoyment of the outdoor adventure, survival, wilderness,
With
that
everybody.
kind of stuff. Yeah.
And it's funny because this is another time where I would like the Mike to be here because he actually interesting for those who've been keeping up on social media. He kind of took the opposite approach. He kind of thought hoped that the Boy Scouts would remain for boys. I don't know if you read his piece on that. But so it's fascinating that I don't know how many listeners have imagined that you guys would have ended up flipping on that. Although I think again this is a private organization, so it's going to be very different. So, well, I think we got one more story I'd like to hit, Jay, before we continue forward. But before we do that, we got one more ad. We have ZipRecruiter. So I don't know if anybody out there is looking for great talent for your business, but I do know that if you have a business, even just what we do here for ZipRecruiter, or sorry, for Politics Guys, it takes time. Um, so you don't want to have to slog through huge stacks of resumes to find the perfect hire. You just need the right tools. You need smarter tools. With ZipRecruiter, you can post your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards with just one click. So you can rest easy knowing your job is being seen by the right candidates. Then ZipRecruiter puts its smart matching technology to work, actively notifying qualified candidates about your job within minutes of your posting so you receive the best possible matches. That's why ZipRecruiter is different. Unlike other hiring sites, ZipRecruiter does not depend on the right candidate finding you, it finds them. You can even get a head start on the interview process by adding screening questions to your job post to help identify the most qualified candidate. With all that, it's no wonder 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. And the easy to use ZipRecruiter dashboard lets you manage your hiring process from start to finish all in one place. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by growing businesses of all sizes and industries to find the most qualified job candidates with immediate results. And right now, Politics Guys listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to ziprecruiter.com/politicsguy. That's ziprecruiter.com/politicsguy. One more time, to try it for free, go to ziprecruiter.com/politicsguy. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. So as we talk about a little bit of that, Jay, one of the interesting things that came out for me this week, so as listeners may know, if you've paid attention, my area is presidential politics, communication. I've written on that extensively. And so I couldn't get through the week without noting there was some big news about the Obama Foundation and its very unconventional approach to its presidential center and library. As we already know, we finally got a place for it in Chicago. It is going to opt to host a digital archive of President Barack Obama's records and not keep any of his hard copy manuscripts, letters, and other documents on site. This would mark a first time ever. So there's not going to be any thumbing through this. Instead, all of these things are going to be online in some capacity. So I mean, the upside to this means anybody, listeners, me, you can kind of get it without going to Chicago. But a lot of people are curious about it because how are you going to sift through this material? How are you going to make it available digitally? Is it going to be searchable? How long will it take for it all to be there? There's been a number of historians asking about this. As a matter of fact, according to the Tribune at least, the physical records are currently in a private facility in Illinois, and they're going to be shipped to all kinds of different locations in and around Washington, D.C., where you may or may not ever be able to get your hands on them. So just kind of a fascinating mark for a president. This will be our first digital. For contrast, George W. Bush's libraries, there are hard copies. They are making digital copies of things, although it's going to take decades to get them all online. But the manuscripts, everything is in fact there. I don't know if you have any thought. I don't know if you're interested in this like I am, Jay, but
Yeah, no,
I find
I
this
am.
fascinating.
I am. And again, this is a weird, I can't even tell you exactly where it comes from. This is like just a funny thing in conservative DNA. Is I like books and I like paper and I think there's something to that, to be able to say this is the actual historical document. Um, for a lot of reasons. Again, just one is like I said, maybe it's a weird just aesthetic sort of thing. But second, there is the idea that what it is there, it's real. Um, Data can be manipulated, things can get lost, and I think that's a I don't want to say a concern, but if you look forward, if you look at what the purpose of a presidential library is, um, and again, I can also see the side of having things digitized, and having things all electronic makes them more available in some sense. Um, but uh, but it's always good to have the source document somewhere where you can get them and where they're going to be maintained.
Exactly, and that's what the fascinating part to me. When George
I
W.
guess the
Bush.
question is why not do
Yeah,
that?
I mean, why not put them both together? That's the thing that's fast. I mean, yes, please heavens, digitize them, but why wouldn't you also house them there in a systematic way? But, this is interesting
Or
too.
even if it's a space issue, we can't house them there. Then okay, then you get some other place to physically house them
Yes, where you can have access
that
to
would be
them.
accessible to scholars and so forth. Yeah.
Because it's fascinating, just historically speaking. Clinton and George W. Bush, they had both opted not. They sent almost no emails on purpose because they didn't know how they'd have to or need to be archived. Because one of the things I'd always wondered about with Barack Obama, he had sent lots and lots of digital only material, and in many ways, he's one of the first presidents to do that. So I recognize that you're going to have a lot of documents that are digital and only, in other words, they're
Sure,
original.
that's the original form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. I- And it kind of makes me wonder about, I mean, I know we're talking way down the road, but eventually we're going to have Trump archives and even more of these things will be digital. I wonder if he'll opt to go a similar way, or that's, it's a fascinating look forward. And it marks a shift with presidents that, even just right now with President Trump, he sometimes keeps tweets. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, Jay, where he was deleting tweets, after
Right.
he didn't get his, oh my goodness, now I'm gonna blank, the election. Oh,
Oh, the Alabama
yes,
senatorial. Yeah.
I couldn't think of Alabama saved my life. And how do you handle those kinds of digital records? I mean, that'll be an interesting take as we move forward. Uh, but it's fascinating. But so you are like, see, I go both ways, Jay. I have books and bookshelves of books, but I have digital books as well. And anytime I don't think I'm going to move, I like hard copies. But then when I think, oh, we're going to move, because I've moved a number of times, I think, why do I have all these heavy things?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I understand, it's difficult to house all that stuff, but yeah. Well, anything you'd like to add, Jay?
No, I think that's about it for this week. We actually, yeah, went pretty long here without Mike pushing us, but
Well, I mean, sometimes we get to do these things anyway. So, before we say goodbye, I just want to remind you of this week's sponsors. We've got Brooklinen, uh, and we're going to be asking to try these sheets. Love these sheets. The only way to get $20 off and a free shipping is to use the promo code TPG at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com. Promo code TPG, Brooklinen, the best sheets ever. Also, Bombfell. Bombfell is giving Politics Guys listeners a special offer, $25 off their first purchase. To take advantage of this, go to bombfell.com/TPG. That's BOMBFELL.com/TPG. Bombfell, open and close. And then ZipRecruiter. Find out why more people are using ZipRecruiter in industries of all sizes. And right now, Politics Guys listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to ziprecruiter.com/politicsguy. That's ziprecruiter.com/politicsguy. One more time to try it for free. Go to ziprecruiter.com/politicsguy. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. So I just want to thank all of our listeners for this week, and we hope that you'll listen again on Wednesday and next week, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you very much.